Good morning, everyone. It's a great privilege to have the opportunity to share with you a bit about TradeLens, which you may have heard about. As you know, perhaps then it is a joint project that initially was started by Maersk and IBM, but by now it's a lot of other companies, organizations also using TradeLens. And I'm going to share some details with you now. So, as you have already mentioned, 2018 was the first time you may have heard about TradeLens, because that's when we came up with the actual name TradeLens. The project itself, however, started even earlier than that. And it may be interesting to you here in a customs context that TradeLens actually has its roots in a customs project. Back in 2016 it was, the European Commission had a research project called the EU Core project. And as part of this research project, there were different working groups that were all trying to figure out how to make supply chains more efficient and at the same time also safer. So back then, there was one working group in which Maersk, together with IBM, together with the Customs Administration of the Netherlands, and together with the Technical University in Delft, they were the kind of academic research partner and all of that. Back then, this group of organizations tried to figure out how to bring more security to supply chains and facilitate trade at the same time. And back then, a concept called the shipping information pipeline was born. So that basically, the shipping information pipeline was supposed to be one place where all the information pertaining to the shipment of one container can be found. Out of that, then later, as you perhaps know, came the idea of TradeLens, because back then Maersk and IBM said, this is actually good stuff. We shouldn't just let this research be research. We should actually try to build this kind of shipping information pipeline. And that's what you see in 2018 when TradeLens was first launched. Since then, obviously, a lot of things have happened. Some of the major other shipping lines, competitors of Maersk, have decided to likewise join the platform in order to share information within global trade. Now, the kind of motivation behind a platform like TradeLens is that we see global trade today still very inefficient. A lot of the documents that we still have are in paper. There is huge opportunity for digitization. There's huge opportunity for further streamlining of processes. If you look at the maritime industry today and perhaps the larger global trade industry today, you will see that nobody ever has full end-to-end visibility about their shipments. Typically what you see is that one organization perhaps connects their IT systems with one other organization. So, for example, a terminal might connect to the shipping line via EDI. It's a one-to-one connection. And then maybe the shipping line connects to the freight forwarder. But the freight forwarder would never connect to the terminal. It doesn't make sense for them. So we have a lot of these one-to-one connections, and some information is being shared, but nobody really has the full end-to-end picture. And this is where the idea of TradeLens comes in. So we say we have one platform to which you have to connect once, but on this platform you find all of your business partners in your supply chain and you can exchange data with them. So this inefficiency, these paper-based documents, this lack of information sharing was really the main motivation behind building a platform like TradeLens. Now, to understand a bit better how the platform works and what kind of data can be shared on it, I have brought this slide. And I know it's pretty loaded, but we're going to take it apart now. So if you look at the top, you see a very generic supply chain. It's probably one of the rather simple supply chains that you can find. You have your exporter on the left, you have your third-party logistics provider, a trucking company, sometimes a railway operator. Then you always have some government authorities, at least there's customs, sometimes there's also veterinary authorities, phytosanitary authorities, and so on. Ports and terminals, shipping line in the middle, and then the same again mirrored on the importing side. Now, of course, there can be much more complicated supply chains than that, but this is just to give you an idea. Now, along the entire journey of a container, different data is being generated for that container. And when I say data, I really mean two different kinds of data. The way that we separate data here or differentiate between it is that we say the first kind of data pertains to all the shipping events, sometimes called container status messages, sometimes called milestones. But basically what it is, it's the track and trace capability of the TradeLens platform. And here you would have events typically starting from when a container is booked. So you see, okay, now the booking has been placed, now the empty container has been picked up, now the container has been stuffed, put on the truck, gated in at the terminal, cleared by customs, loaded on the vessel, and so on and so forth. So that's the track and trace part. The second kind of data that can be shared on TradeLens pertains to the documents. Bills of lading, commercial invoices, packing lists, certificates of origin, all kinds of documents that you need in global trade. And here it can be shared either as structured data, meaning XML or JSON, or as unstructured, meaning PDF or JPEG. That, by the way, is also the part of the TradeLens platform where blockchain technology is being applied. Now, to give you an idea about what this previous science fiction has now actually turned, and I've also brought some numbers with you. So by now, TradeLens has tracked around 2.2 billion events coming from around 42 million containers. More than 20 million documents have been published on TradeLens. So in total, we say at this point in time, we capture around 60% of the global containerized trade. And these numbers are still growing as we connect more and more of the network. And I'm going to give you an idea of the network here in a second, because whenever we talk about a global trade platform, it's to some extent, of course, the technical platform that you're building that provides the value, but really the main value comes from the network that is behind your platform, right? And in that sense, TradeLens is just like any other platform business. It benefits from the fact that a large ecosystem is using it. And it's fair to say that initially our main focus was on developing the port ecosystem. At this point in time, we have connected around 180 ports directly to TradeLens. That means 180 ports. You can see them, some of them here with red dots. They are sending data in real time to TradeLens about all the containers that are moving through these ports. Gate in, gate out, load, discharge, vessel arrival, vessel departure. Sometimes also what we call enrichment events. So for example, a terminal could inform you about a customs release or when a container has been selected for inspection. Terminal could also sometimes tell you about verified gross mass or when a seal number has been updated. So these terminals already send data directly to TradeLens, but as we continue to build these direct connections with all of the ports and terminals around the world, we already receive data indirectly from more than 600 ports and terminals. So what do I mean by indirectly? As I mentioned previously, shipping lines, whenever they send their vessels to a specific terminal, they usually have an IT integration with that terminal. And they already receive from the terminal a lot of events about the status of the container. And the shipping lines on TradeLens, they are forwarding these terminal status messages to TradeLens, so that already today TradeLens can offer a global network of ports and terminals and showing the live status of the container. Then as we continued on our journey, we have also started to realize that a lot of the blind spots in global trade are perhaps not so much in the terminal, but it's the inland part of the supply chain where the visibility for the importers and exporters is quite diminished. So more recently, since a bit more than a year, we've also put more focus on connecting trucking companies, connecting railway operators, sometimes barge operators, to also cover this inland leg of the supply chain. That is quite challenging in many ways because while terminals are already used to sending kind of event status messages to shipping lines and now TradeLens, we see that when it comes to railway operators and trucking companies, the digital readiness is perhaps a bit limited. Especially when we talk about trucking operators, there may be some that are very digitally mature and advanced, but the vast majority of them is perhaps just a very small company operating 1 or 2 trucks without any IT department, without any mature systems that would be capable of connecting via API or maybe not even via EDI. So there's of course a challenge in trying to connect a very fragmented ecosystem that is digitally not really ready. And there one has to start looking at alternative solutions, smarter ways of aggregating this kind of tracking data. Could be by means of having an app, a driver app, where the driver has to log when he has arrived at the customer, when the container has been offloaded. Good idea. The issue is that basically everybody who buys trucking services wants the trucker to use their own trucking app. So every trucker by now has 17 different apps on his smartphone and then has to find which one do I now use to report. And since it's all manual input, the data quality is also not so great. So there are a lot of challenges that come with that. Another idea here is to say we can use telematics data, because most of the trucks that are already out there, they have a small device in them that keeps track of the GPS location, that keeps track of when the driver is driving and when he's taking a break. And this data can also be used to then, of course, report positions of the trucks and have some status there. So it's an ecosystem here that comes with its own challenges, but there's also a lot of upside to be gained from having more visibility in the inland space of things. Now, as I mentioned before, ocean carriers have in the meantime joined TradeLens. One of the criticisms that was mentioned regularly in the early days was that TradeLens is just a Maersk platform and it will never be successful if it's a one company solution. But of course we know that, and we've always said TradeLens is really here to be an industry solution that should work for all the different shipping lines. And that's why it was also extremely important for us when some time ago, back in 2019, the other shipping lines, MSC and CMA, and later on also Hapag-Lloyd and One, decided that they are going to support TradeLens and that they're going to upload their data also to TradeLens. So if you take all of the shipping lines that have joined by now, there's also, of course, some of the associated brands like Hamburg Süd, Sealand, Alianza, APL, Zim we also have. We also have some more regional carriers like PIL, Boluda, Namsung Shipping in Korea. So if you take all of that and aggregate it in terms of the market share, then you have around 60% of the global container traffic that you would find on TradeLens. And with that, I'm coming to the end of my presentation. I hope I was able to show you that TradeLens is no longer just science fiction, but it's actually being used by a lot of companies out there already today. And the data set that has become larger and larger is still continuing to grow. And the interesting thing here really is that we have reached a point in time where the network effect is kicking in. And as more and more data is being put on TradeLens, the incentive to join TradeLens also, of course, becomes larger and larger. So it's a very exciting development, and the last 4 years were very, very thrilling, and I'm sure the next 4 years will be too, and the 4 years after. So thanks again for having me today, and happy to take any questions.
The first questions, you lined up this physical supply chain with the various stations. But how about the situation where you put in something extra, for example, pre-shipment inspection? Can you allow for that, integrate that, or do you kind of have models, transport chains that, as you mentioned, if I didn't get you wrong, that you gave an illustration of a rather simple transport chain, but that could be extended. So could you expand a bit on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, really, this was just to give you a model of how it looks like. We understand that real supply chains out there are infinitely more complex. At this point in time, TradeLens has, I think, a bit more than 100 unique event types that can be reported. In there you will have the basic ones like gate in, gate out, vessel arrival, vessel departure, these kind of events, but you also have some more rare events, customs events. So for example, whenever a container has been released, whenever a customs control decision has been taken. And that's exactly where this kind of pre-shipment inspection that I think you mentioned could come in. This data too can be captured on TradeLens, and information can come from customs back to the private sector. Because when customs says, I require more information, right? Well, who's the one who's supposed to provide this information? Is it really just the shipping line? But perhaps the shipping line also doesn't have that information. So in this case, the shipping line would have to go back to the actual exporter or importer and say, hey, customs has asked me for more information, please provide. So you have this intermediary in between the communication between customs and the actual importer. So one of the things we're looking at with TradeLens is to just have like a request for information event shared with all the relevant private participants, so that whoever is supposed to provide this information knows about this request without any delay. Right? So it's definitely possible to capture this kind of data, and as a matter of fact, it's also one of the areas that we see has a lot of potential for us in the future, because this kind of enrichment data is really something in addition to how the global trade works today, right? I mean, just to give you another example, today, most of the terminals out there, they already have a website. And on this terminal website, you can go and you can probably put in a container number, and then the terminal tells you, okay, what's the current status for this particular container? So you could say, okay, great, the data is already there. But sometimes it's not just about data being theoretically available, it's also a question of how accessible is that data really. Because imagine you are a large multinational company, Procter & Gamble or whoever, and you have thousands of containers en route at every point in time. And they're going from hundreds of ports to hundreds of ports. I mean, what are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to check hundreds of terminal websites every 2 minutes for the latest status of your 1,000 containers? It just doesn't work, right? So it's important to actually take the data that in many cases is already available and combine it in one place where it's actually accessible as kind of one repository or one-stop shop for the users then to access.
Are there many other people waiting to pose questions, or and then I can just? Okay, I can just if it's some time left after.
Yes. About the technical integration with TradeLens, I believe it's the responsibilities of the transporters or importers, exporters, all these actors. What is the kind of lead time for this project with regard to the technical integration? Because it is blockchain technology, so how much of investment do you normally foresee that somebody joining TradeLens needs to do before they can be on board?
That's a good question. I mean, we understood that in order for TradeLens to be widely adopted, it has to be easy to integrate with TradeLens. And not a lot of companies out there have blockchain capabilities. Not all of them want to have blockchain capabilities. So what we have done is we have abstracted all of our internal complexity behind an API. And this API, I guess most of you know, API is just the state-of-the-art way of connecting IT systems. And that's what we expose. Our API documentation is available publicly. And if you have an IT team that is skilled enough, then it is very easy for them to integrate to this API. So the lead time here is, I don't know, it depends how fast your IT team is. We see terminals integrating within a number of days. So then, of course, if you have very complicated back-end systems, maybe there's some work you have to do there. Now, we also understand that not every organization out there has API capabilities, and especially in our industry, we know IT systems have a lot of legacy with them, and EDI is the dominant kind of way of integrating. So What we've also done is we have provided the opportunity to actually connect to TradeLens via EDI. So we have an EDI gateway which accepts all the different messages, Codeco, Query, whatever you want to send, and transforms that so it can go into TradeLens. And then as a third option for interfacing with TradeLens, we also provide a user interface. So just in your browser, you go to tradelens.com and you log in, and then in your browser you can see what is the journey of the container. So if you don't want to have any IT integration at all, or you can't, then this is still an option.
Okay. My second question relates to, I mean, you've shown us that this integration on the physical transport chain can be done more efficiently. But how about these various paper tigers, so to say, like customs, banks, and insurance companies that also come into play, especially when it comes to the exchange of trade documents? Do you have an ambition to integrate to them as well?
That's a good point, and I think we're learning more and more as we also progress with customs that there's more besides customs that needs to be integrated, and the banks is a good example for all of that. One of the product offerings that TradeLens has is the electronic bill of lading, and that's exactly what we are in many countries implementing right now, because we understand the need for a bill of lading. In many cases, it's the banks that are requesting for the bill of lading, right? It's not even the exporters or importers that say, I want a printed copy. It's the banks that say, I need this for my letter of credit or whatever. So by providing an electronic bill of lading, something that is on the one hand electronic, but it still represents the title to the goods and you can still transfer ownership and so on. So it combines the kind of advantages of both worlds. That is something that we can also offer to banks in an effort to reduce the paper trail that these organizations are triggering. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nicolas, and
Pleasure.
for your presentation.
Thank you.
And for coming to Norway
Absolutely.
to share your knowledge.